Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. First off, happy Labor Day. Today is our day. It's Workers' Labor Day, and I was privileged this morning to join our brothers and sisters in Branch 157 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for a Labor Day event that's been going on there for many years with a lot of unions. And in that event, we talked about that we were there to do two things: to celebrate the things that we've achieved as unions over the years, but also to recommit ourselves and continue the fight that we have had to endure this year and what we have in front of us. Letter carriers have faced a lot of challenges in 2025. We've had a lot of fights, and I wanted to take this opportunity to update everyone that joined on where we are on each of those fights. So I'm going to talk about several things, and then at the end, we'll have an opportunity for you to submit questions. Back in February, we held an event to kick off a campaign that we called Fight Like Hell, and we knew that in the year 2025 and beyond, that we would have a lot of fights in front of us. And at that event, we talked about several fights that we expected, things like collective bargaining, protecting our benefits like retirement in Congress, and advancing our priorities, such as the Federal Retirement Fairness Act that would allow former non-career employees to have their time as a non-career employee credited for retirement. We talked about protecting our jobs and protecting the Postal Service as the public service that it is. Contract compliance. We have fought a battle for a long time now on a daily basis across the country with the Postal Service complying, or in many cases failing to comply with our national agreement. And we talked about crime. Over the last few years, we've experienced a significant increase in crime. And lastly, we talked about heat safety. This has become a hazard for letter carriers in large parts of the country in longer durations, different months of the year. So it's an increasing hazard that we've had to deal with. So I want to get in and update everyone on each and every one of these areas. Let's start with collective bargaining. And first, I want to talk about the implementation of our current collective bargaining agreement. And just this past Friday, letter carriers all over the country received back pay for several retroactive pay increases that were included in the 2023 national agreement. We did a really long piece that explains in detail, explains back pay, it explains the other economic components of our collective bargaining agreements. It gives some history. That is going to appear in the September postal record, which will be out later this coming week. We thought since back pay was going to be paid on August 29th, we would post it early on our website. So we did just that about a week ago. So that's available. If you have not read that, I strongly encourage you to do so. We've also, over the last week or so, collected a lot of different questions and put together some questions and answers to frequently asked questions. And those are also available on our website. You can find those answers on our social media channels as well. We have another pay increase that is going into effect next Saturday, September the 6th. It is a cost of living adjustment of $790 at top step. That will be effective September the 6th and will be reflected in the paycheck that follows a couple of weeks later. Going forward, we'll have a general wage increase in November of 1.5%, and then we will have another cost of living adjustment next March based on the Consumer Price Index for January of 2026. We also will open collective bargaining for our next agreement in February of 2026. So that's coming quickly, and we are hard at work on preparation for collective bargaining. I want to talk just a little bit about what that process looks like and what members can look forward to in the next few months. And also, everyone's going to have an opportunity to engage in this process. On one hand, our preparations never really stop on a lot of issues, but certainly as we approach the opening of collective bargaining, which is now just about 6 months or so away, those preparations really ramp up. And we are in the process of really engaging a lot of different people in that preparation phase. The Executive Council of the NALC, all of the elected national business agents and resident officers and the 3 trustees will be in Washington, D.C. this week, and primarily they will be here to begin work in earnest on what we call internal subcommittees on different topics related to collective bargaining. These Executive Council members choose the topics that they want to participate in. We pair them up with headquarters staff here at NALC, and they do a number of different things. They review our official bargaining positions, which come from NALC conventions going all the way back to 1970. These positions start as resolutions generally at branch meetings or at state conventions, and they are then submitted to national conventions and debated on and considered and ultimately either adopted or not adopted by the delegates to the convention. So once they are adopted, they become our official bargaining positions. Of course, those council members and staff bring with them their own experience based on what they deal with on a daily basis, what they hear from you, our members, and they are charged with digging through all that stuff, bringing their own ideas to the table, and ultimately actually drafting and writing the proposals that we submit in the collective bargaining process. So there's a lot of work that's going to happen this week that, of course, will continue over the next several months in terms of the council members and our headquarters staff. We additionally, in a couple of weeks, I guess 2 weeks from yesterday, we are going to have 30 letter carriers come, and we're calling them a rank and file committee. They kind of divide into 3 different groups. One group is branch leaders, one group is those that have a lot of experience in contract enforcement and familiarity with our collective bargaining agreements, and then a group of those that are less experienced or kind of newer members of NALC. And we basically are going to have them replicate the same exercise that our subcommittees that are made up of council members and staff go through. We're really excited about the group of people that we have coming here. I think they're going to offer excellent input into the collective bargaining process. And we're really excited to see what they come up with, what their ideas are after reviewing the same type of information that I talked about for the internal subcommittees. And then, of course, once that's done, that'll be shared with our council members, and we think will really be an important piece of educating the type of proposal that our council puts together for us to submit and try to achieve in collective bargaining. In addition to that, we're going to have multiple opportunities over the course of the next few months for all of our members to engage and provide input and feedback in the collective bargaining process. Of course, we get a lot of communication at headquarters. We get a lot of communication through our regional offices, through our branches out there on topics and issues that are important to members, ranging from issues that are happening that might be new to, issues that maybe have been official bargaining positions of ours for a long time that we really want to address. And we always encourage any type of feedback anyone can provide. What we intend to do is provide you with the opportunity through surveys and things like that to have a more structured way to provide that input. Allows us to collect that input and then also use that as a resource for our executive council. So as we progress through this preparation process, there's going to be an opportunity for everybody to engage. We are excited about sharing a lot of the things that we come up with the members so that, there is a sort of common understanding of what we are trying to achieve in collective bargaining. So stay tuned over the next few months. As I said, we will officially begin towards the end of February next year, but there's going to be plenty of opportunity for folks to be involved and engaged over the next several months. Next is Congress, and we have dealt with a lot of things in Congress in 2025. The place I'll start is protecting what we have and what we've earned. And I know almost everyone listening to this, I'm sure, has some level of understanding, awareness, or knowledge of the legislation that was passed last month called the One Big Beautiful Bill through a process called budget reconciliation. And while that bill includes all kinds of things that a lot of people have very strong feelings about, One thing that is very important is this was a major victory for us, not the passage of the bill, but the fact that that bill passed and we avoided cuts to things like our retirement or making us pay more for our retirement. It was a several month process in the House and the Senate of putting together this legislation. And over the course of those few months, we dealt with one proposal after another to eliminate certain benefits, to make us pay more for our retirement benefits. Then a sort of last minute attempt to harm the Postal Service by making the Postal Service give back money that had been appropriated for something that we need as bad as we need almost anything else, and that's new vehicles. Um, it really showed the strength of our union and the strength of our membership, the bipartisan relationships that we've developed over time for us to get through that entire process unscathed. That's the good news. The challenge that's ahead of us is Congress is going to do this same exercise again. Of course, they would not pass the same legislation, but it'll be similar. And they will seek to find more ways to modify the way money is spent, to cut spending. So, as sure as we dealt with this the last time, we are certainly going to deal with those types of threats again. And we have to be prepared to ensure that we do everything we can to defend our retirement benefits, which is primarily the target in this type of legislation. But in addition to kind of defending and protecting what we already have, it's really important for us to try to advance the priorities that we have. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those in the next few minutes. But the first one I want to mention is legislation that's really important to a lot of letter carriers, and it's a bill that we have been behind for a few Congresses now, and really we're kind of the driving force in getting this bill introduced, and that's the Federal Retirement Fairness Act. And this legislation has been introduced in the House. It's a bipartisan piece of legislation that would allow former non-career employees, in our case, that's casuals, TEs, and of course, CCAs that served after December 31st, 1988, to make deposit or buy back that non-career time and have it credited for their retirement. So we continue to work to build support on both sides of the aisle through co-sponsors for that legislation. And just being honest, I think that there's probably not a great opportunity in this particular Congress over the course of this year and next year to pass this bill, but you never know when an opportunity is going to come along. Just look at last December when we passed a long-time priority of ours, the Social Security Fairness Act. And when that opportunity presented itself, we were able to get that bill over the finish line because of all the work that had been done to build support over the years. So this will definitely remain a priority of ours, the Federal Retirement Fairness Act. We also are currently working on legislation. It's not yet been introduced, but probably will be introduced when Congress comes back here over the next few weeks. And that bill is to further address the Postal Service's finances, the way they are able to invest all the money they've set aside for retirement and things like that. The Postal Service being in a good financial position and making common sense policy changes that benefit the Postal Service financially are good for letter carriers. It's good for us in terms of job security. It's good for us in terms of what the Postal Service is able to invest in as far as infrastructure, things like vehicles and other things we need in the future. And of course, when it comes to our collective bargaining process, it's always a positive thing when the Postal Service is in a good financial situation. So that legislation is coming this fall, and as we've done with the previous postal reform legislation that we passed a few years ago, we'll work really hard to build bipartisan support for that legislation. Protecting our jobs and protecting the Postal Service. This has been really a source of a lot of battles this year. It's been something that we have faced really since the very beginning of the current administration in the White House. I mentioned we had this event in February to kick off this campaign, and just a couple of weeks later, the White House came very, very close to taking some sort of executive action that would have just frankly destroyed the Postal Service. Moving the Postal Service under the Department of Commerce, opening the door for private shippers to come take the business they want, dismantling the governance model of the Postal Service, just all bad things. Thankfully, because of the action primarily that letter carriers took, that did not happen. And we pushed back on that and continued to do that into the month of March. On March 23rd, we had around 300 events, rallies around the country to support the public postal service. But this is not something that's going away because it's motivated primarily by our competition. It's motivated by private shippers. The action the White House wanted to take in February was motivated by private shippers. While the White House doesn't currently, as far as we know, have any intention to take that type of action, the motivation for those private shippers has not stopped. We don't have to look any further than the recent appointment of a new Postmaster General. David Steiner started as Postmaster General on July the 12th and comes directly from the board of FedEx. As far as Postmaster General Steiner, he has been here for, I guess, 7 weeks or so now. To his credit, he has, I think, very publicly said that he does not support privatization of the Postal Service, and that's a good thing. He has not taken any negative action in terms of big changes so far. So, what happens in the future, whether it's in his tenure as Postmaster General or someone else, remains to be seen. But one thing is for sure, the private shippers are there, and the private shippers are people that compete with us for package delivery, and they have a direct interest in the Postal Service failing. So as long as those forces are behind the scenes pushing, whether it's the White House, whether it's the leadership at the Postal Service, whether it's folks on Capitol Hill, that's a battle that we are going to have to continue to fight. And just to be clear, the best model for the Postal Service is the current model. Certainly, there are a lot of things with the Postal Service that need to improve. But one thing that is not broken is the model that's been in place for 55 years now, and that is a public service that provides universal service that serves everybody every day, no matter where they live, for the same price as an independent agency of the federal government. We intend to continue to fight and do everything in our power to keep it that way. Speaking of the Postal Service, one of the major problems that we continue to combat is contract compliance. And, over the years, we have negotiated collective bargaining agreements. We've achieved collective bargaining agreements through the interest arbitration process, and they've all been done in good faith. And when a collective bargaining agreement is agreed upon, that's a commitment. It's a commitment from the management side. It's a commitment from the union side. And there should be a very clear expectation that both sides live up to their commitment. The NALC has always lived up to its commitment in our collective bargaining agreement. Increasingly, the Postal Service has not. And the Postal Service has continued increasingly to violate our agreement through decisions that are made on a daily basis, mostly at the local level by management, through directives that have come from upper management, even all the way up to the Postal Service headquarters, directing other managers to do things that are very clearly in violation of our collective bargaining agreement. We have a grievance arbitration process, our dispute resolution process, that is the most sophisticated grievance arbitration process of any union in this country. We defend and represent our members better than anyone else. And we have used that grievance process for many, many years, not just to remedy violations, but to remedy these continuous violations, whether it's failure to comply with a previous grievance settlement, or it's the same violation of our national agreement that continues over and over, in many cases, day after day after day. And we are not going to stop doing that. In fact, we are going to do nothing but double down, improve our training, expand our training, which we are already really good at, to ensure that those that represent letter carriers have every tool they could possibly need to represent our members through the grievance procedure. But the Postal Service's actions and inaction in contract compliance have very clearly led us to a place where we are going to leave no stone unturned. Frankly, this is not the best environment for unions, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, just in terms of the administration that's in place and the things that we see floating around, the attacks we see, frankly, on other unions. But we have a collective bargaining agreement. The employer has an obligation to live up to that collective bargaining agreement. So whether it's through the grievance process at the local level, it's through the grievance process at the national level if the violations are of an interpretive nature, or a national level type violation, or anywhere else we have to go, we are going to do everything we possibly can to hold them accountable to do something very simple. Do what you committed to do for your employees, for our members, for the people that make the Postal Service what it is. One of the difficult things that we've dealt with in recent years is a rise in crime. If we go back to 2020 and just look at what's happened over the last now 5 years or so, we've seen an unprecedented level of violent crime committed against letter carriers. Now, according to law enforcement, it's kind of rooted in the pandemic. During COVID, there was an increase of crime with the mail in general, which led to an increase in crime for those trying to access the mail. And a way that they have tried to access the mail is through primarily robbing our members and trying to gain access to our keys or steal the mail directly. So the last couple of years, this has been a big priority for us because we've seen the number of crimes increase. But what is really disturbing is that the prosecutions for these crimes, federal crime, is at an alarmingly low level. When we first looked really deep into the prosecutions a few years ago, only about 14% of crimes committed against letter carriers resulted in both an arrest and a federal prosecution. Of course, that is completely unacceptable. So over the last couple of years, we've held events around the country to raise awareness, to get local media to cover it, to let the community know, because the people we deliver to in the community, they support us, but they have to know this is going on. And we've seen some improvements in the places where we've done these types of events. We've seen the U.S. Attorney's offices begin to prioritize these a little bit more, but we still have a long way to go. And there are several pieces to resolving this problem. Unfortunately, it is not the kind of thing where simply flipping a switch or there's some action that, like flipping a switch, results in change. One of those things, of course, is prosecuting the crimes, ensuring that those that commit these crimes are held accountable. You know, for many, many, many years, I think there was a mindset that so many letter carriers, so many of us saw day to day and just frankly probably took for granted that people thought we are federal employees. If you mess with a federal employee, you're in big trouble. You're going to jail. We have to make that a reality again. Because our keys have been such a big target, replacing them with a more secure electronic alternative like we tested in so many locations, and now the Postal Service thankfully is beginning to deploy them in different spots around the country, is a really important piece of this as well. The last piece is when someone is found guilty, the sentencing. And we have had sentencing extremes on both ends. We've had letter carriers that have been violently robbed where an arrest has happened, a federal prosecution has happened, and the perpetrators have been sentenced to 30 days in jail. We've had basically the same crime, the same set of circumstances happen, and they've been sentenced to 8, 10 years in prison. So a big piece of this is, of course, talking with the Postal Service and the Inspection Service, and doing everything we can do, raising awareness, like I mentioned. But there's a legislative component that needs to happen. And in the last Congress, we had a bill introduced called the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act. And it's been reintroduced in this Congress. It's a bipartisan bill. It's been introduced in the House and in the Senate. And that bill would appropriate some money to speed up replacing all of our airlock keys. It would designate a prosecutor in every United States Attorney's office to prosecute these crimes against us. And it would change the sentencing when someone is found guilty to the same type of sentencing requirements as if the same crime had been committed against a federal law enforcement officer. So along with the Federal Retirement Fairness Act, this is our top priority. And getting this bill passed would make a lot of changes immediately that would put us on a path to really being able to see some improvement and stop these crimes from happening. Last topic I want to cover is heat safety. And this is an issue that it's a scientific fact that it's hotter every year. It's hotter for longer periods of the year. It's also a fact that letter carriers spend more time outside in the elements than we ever have. A larger percentage, a larger portion of our workday is spent out in the elements. And heat safety in general in this country has become a bigger issue, and we've certainly seen that in our craft. And our union has been very heavily engaged in this problem for at least 13 years that I know of, that I've been directly involved in it. Unfortunately, over that 13-year period, we have had a number of letter carriers experience heat illness, and unfortunately, we've lost a number of letter carriers to the impact and the effects of excessive heat. The United States of America is the only country, the only industrialized country in the world that does not have a heat safety standard for workers. And the fact is we have engaged not only the Postal Service over this 12, 13-year period, but also the Department of Labor, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. There is no heat safety standard. So they are very handicapped in what they can enforce and what they can hold employers accountable to do. Back in 2018, leading into 2019, after so many times that OSHA had cited the Postal Service for their conduct, even through their limited enforcement mechanisms, the Postal Service did create a heat illness prevention plan. That heat illness prevention plan, the things that are included in it are just fine. There is nothing wrong with them, but they are not nearly enough. It's mostly centered around just education and training and awareness, which is certainly a piece of this, but it does not include the things that experts recommend, such as ensuring that you have a work rest regimen, ensuring that if you return to work in the heat after being off for a period of time, your body is given the opportunity to acclimatize. And ultimately, the answer to this problem, because the Postal Service or any other employer doesn't really have any incentive to do anything beyond what OSHA requires them to do. So the ultimate answer is for there to be what there should have been long ago in America, a heat safety standard for workers. Last year, the Biden administration, the Department of Labor under the Biden administration, published a proposed rule that would create a heat safety standard for all workers. And this proposed rule included all of the elements that are recommended by experts. When the Trump administration was sworn in on January 20th, on the first day, an executive order was issued that, in a nutshell, said all proposed rules would either be withdrawn or placed on hold, which is very common when you have a change in party in the White House. This has happened multiple times in years past. The Department of Labor placed this rule on hold. Thankfully, it's not been withdrawn. They held about 3 weeks of hearings back in late June, and I think into early July. NALC testified in those proceedings, and We are now at a place where, based on what's happened and the comments that have been submitted and the entire rulemaking process, we will see what the Department of Labor will do with this rule. We testified there. We have been very, I would say, forceful with the Department of Labor about the importance of this issue and that this rule is what we need to happen in order to give employees the best opportunity to work safely and be protected from the hazards of excessive heat. So we will certainly keep the pressure on in that regard. I know a lot of people are probably watching this and have questions. So we have created an avenue for you to submit those questions. You will see a link up on the screen that you can click that'll take you to a web form on our website where you can submit those questions. What we will do is once we get the questions, presumably here in the next little while tonight, we'll take those questions and then I'll make another video and get that out tomorrow to answer some of the questions. So it's been a year of fights, and we've taken on this mantra of fight like hell. And this morning at the Labor Day event in Philly, joined by a couple of my fellow union presidents and across the labor movement, people are taking on this mantra of fight like hell because the fights are not going to stop. They are going to continue. The threats are going to keep coming, and they are real. Just look at the rights of so many other union workers that have just been gutted so far in 2025, particularly other federal employees. The attacks we've seen on federal employees and federal employee unions, like our brothers and sisters with the American Federation of Government Employees, are really unprecedented in American history. We've never seen such an attack on unions. And so far, our union's loud, unified voice has gotten us through, but there are more fights to come. But we'll win, and we will win with the strength of our solidarity and speaking loudly with that unified voice. So thank you all for what you do every day, what you do for our union, and what you do for each other. And once again, happy Labor Day.